Time to grace the gold stage.
I only come here for the intros. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of my target demographic. Before I get started on this, a couple of quick housekeeping things I have to do. Firstly, thank you for having me. I forget to say that every month, and then I drive home going, oh, I hate myself. Secondly, I realized on my way here that after getting home from the dog park and changing my clothes, I put on the same shoes. So if there is any single person in this room who has been judging me harshly for wearing my casual boat shoes with this outfit, know in your heart that I have been judging myself equally harshly. Thirdly, for those of you who don't know, yesterday a panda at the National Zoo went into labor and immediately demanded better wages and healthcare for all pandas. It's, you know, the joke, you write the joke and it's got a week of shelf life, you do it where you can. And finally, my new novel, Laughs Last, from Wheelman Press, distributed by Ingram, available at Amazon. The piece today is called Breathe In, Breathe Out. Sometimes, when I can't sleep at night, I stay up and chat online with Amelia. Amelia and I have only met in person once. We found each other online several years ago when I had just purchased my first screaming dial-up 14.4 modem. We found each other because we both belong to same of the seriously niche literary and sexual fetish chat groups, and then later picture sharing groups, and then later, of course, video. We began chatting. We immediately took a liking to one another in text. She's far more computer involved and computer literate than I am. She's always blogged and she designs avatars and she introduces me to new chat room abbreviations and emoticons. She can turn punctuation marks into an astonishing number of little faces, little smileys and winkies and evocative stern grumpies. Last spring, when I was in New York for some meetings, we finally met in person. We spent an evening drinking lightly in a hotel bar, making fun of strangers and flirting as though neither of us was married. I tried to impress her with talk of my martial arts training, and she redirected the conversation toward finding me a proper martial arts nickname. She said that for it to be proper, it had to be an element or other hard substance paired with an animal. Jade Monkey, she suggested, or Iron Tiger. I suggested Platinum Aardvark. Perhaps I could be the Silver Penguin. She felt I was not taking the endeavor seriously enough and suggested Mercurial Jackass. Other than that one evening, we've only spoken online and over the years a few times by phone. Lately, we've had an unusual number of opportunities to exchange instant messages as my sleep has been troubled by difficulties breathing. I've had intermittent asthma problems for years, a contributing factor to my lifelong sense of myself as inherently non-athletic, even as I trained in martial arts. But the trouble I've had over the past couple of months has been different from the wheezing fits that plagued me during gym class as a child. I find myself unable to properly fill my lungs with air. I lie in bed gasping like a fish in an art gallery. I doze fitfully, awaken in a suffocating panic, and try again to sleep. Eventually, I get up and go to my home office so as to avoid waking my wife, who needs to get up far earlier than I to support this. I chat with Amelia until I'm so exhausted that even the smothering fear can't keep me awake. I began to think something was really wrong. I smoked for years and my life has been filled lately with a lot of lung cancer stories. Friends, relatives, relatives of friends, friends of relatives, and also, apparently, the Pacific Ocean is now radioactive. In a text message, I told Amelia that I couldn't breathe and I was afraid I was dying. And in text, that's the kind of thing that carries a lot more weight than it does when I say it over coffee to my wife, hoping that she will roll her eyes and say, "You're not dying." Amelia became worried that I was dying and insisted that I go see a doctor, and I didn't want to go see a doctor. I was desperately afraid that I would learn that I was dying. Somehow knowing it would make it far worse than imagining it. I do not like being afraid in general. Being desperately afraid I find to be most unpleasant, out of keeping with the confident, glib persona I try to maintain. I should say this. While the martial arts that I study are Korean, I've been fascinated by the psychology and the philosophy behind martial arts for years before I began training. I read Sun Tzu's Art of War in high school, and then I went on to Musashi's Book of Five Rings. I became fascinated with the Japanese concept of Bushido, the way of the warrior, the way of honor. A lot of people believe the samurai to have been fearless. That's not exactly accurate. That appearance is created by the fact that what the samurai feared was very different from what most of us fear in modern America, what most people have feared in most cultures. The samurai do not fear death. The reason they don't fear death is that they have accepted that it is the only possible outcome. From the moment you are born, the only thing that you can be certain of is that someday you will die. Having accepted that fully, they can face the most horrific opponents and seem fearless, because the worst possible outcome is already preordained. They're already dead. There's no need to fear what is certain. Let me just say parenthetically that my favorite moment in today's show thus far was when you handed flowered underwear to Paul Dooley and he said, "Oh, thank you." It was not denial or defiance of death, is my point, but the absolute acceptance of it that allowed the samurai to appear as steely as the swords they carried. In my early 20s, I thought I understood and embraced this. I rode a motorcycle too fast, and I tested the limits of my body's ability to ingest cocaine and hallucinogens and marijuana and alcohol, but I hadn't truly accepted death and overcome its paralyzing power. I was pretending. I was still young enough to believe I was immortal. Oh, good, that's exactly the audience I've been looking for. Dr. Ifequinigwe has the darkest skin of any man I have ever met. He has one of those wide, round bodies that looks obese until you get close enough to realize that it's solid rather than soft. He has a deep voice that he uses so gently that it becomes soothing and fatherly rather than intimidating. And he has an accent from some exotic place where Ifequinigwe is a fairly common name. Dr. Ifequinigwe listened to my chest through a stethoscope, and he sent me down the hall to have my lungs x-rayed, and he tapped on my back with his fingertips, and he asked me questions about my life and my work. And I told him about how few clients I've had this year, and about the ones who have tried to get me to give them cut-rate deals. And I told him about the client I'd worked for years, who had suddenly started questioning the billable time on my invoices. And I told him about a screenplay option that had expired, about the play that had won an award but nobody seems to want to produce. I told him about the unusual amount of spec work I've done this year, and about these spoken word pieces I've been writing and performing that might be some of the best work I've ever done, but aren't being heard by enough people or making me enough to live on, forcing my wife to get up early to support this. I told him that I was afraid my talent and my effort and my work would go forever unnoticed and unrewarded, and I told him about friends and relatives of friends and friends of relatives in the radioactive Pacific Ocean. And I told him that I was tired and I wanted to sleep, but I don't want to die. He chuckled in a deep, fatherly way and said, "You know, Dylan, you are not a walrus." While I had known this, I had never really thought about it, and it certainly wasn't the diagnosis I expected from a Kaiser Permanente doctor. I said, "I beg your pardon, wondering if sleep deprivation had caused me to drift briefly into some bizarre Lewis Carroll dream state." Dr. Ifequinigwe said, "The walrus is a conscious breather. In order to stay underwater for as long as it wants to, it has developed a breathing system that is not autonomic as ours is. It needs to think to breathe. The walrus lies around on ice floes all day thinking, 'Now breathe in. Now breathe out. Now breathe in.' You do not need to think this much about breathing. You are not a walrus." I said, "I'm not dying then, am I?" He said, "Oh, we're all dying. But barring an auto accident or an enraged spouse, you'll be dying for decades to come." And then he grinned at me. He wrote me a prescription for an anti-anxiety drug and suggested that I take one at bedtime if I found myself in a panic. He advised me to think less about breathing and to think more about finding paying clients or a steady day job. Last night, while I was waiting for the ad event to take effect, I logged onto my computer, and almost immediately, a little chime like the sound of Elizabeth Montgomery doing magic told me that I had a message. Amelia greeted me with a few punctuation marks carefully chosen to create a tiny little face filled with affection and concern. "So, titanium platypus," she said, "we meet again. Have you spoken with a doctor?" I typed back LOL, an abbreviation she taught me years ago to claim that I was laughing aloud when I wasn't. "You have mistaken me, lady," I said. "I am known only as the Steel Walrus." Thank you.